Hello, my name is Cici. Today I'm going to introduce the regionalism and multilateral trade agreements. This is the category of the presentation. Firstly, I would like to introduce the regionalism, institutional arrangements designed to facilitate the free flow of goods and service to coordinate foreign economic policies between countries in the same geographic region. Examples of economic regionalism include free trade areas, customs unions, common markets, and economic unions. Developing countries are active participants in the regionalism movement. They see regional integration as an essential avenue towards economic growth, development, and poverty alleviation. Several schemes for regional economic integration were established in Europe in the decades following the Second World War, including the European Coal and Steel Community, which eventually developed in the European Union. The success of organizations and agreements such as the European Union, the North American Free Trade Agreement depended not only on geographic proximity, but also on increasing economic interdependence, relatively homogeneous political structures, and traditions. Whereas open regionalism promotes global trade liberalization, closed regionalism often has to lead to economic warfare and sometimes to military conflict. Open regionalism, however, faces the problem of harmonizing the different economic policies of many countries. Second, I would like to introduce the multilateral trade agreements. Multilateral trade agreements are made between two or more countries to strengthen economy member countries by exchanging of goods and services among them. The multilateral trade agreements build commercial relationship, trade facilitation, and financial investment among member countries. There are five advantages of multilateral trade agreements. It makes all signatories treat each other equally. No country can give better trade deals to one country than it does to another. The second benefit is that it increases trade for every participant. Their companies enjoy low tariffs. That makes their export cheaper. The third benefit is it standardizes commerce regulations for all trade partners. Companies save legal costs since they follow the same rules for each country. The fourth benefit is that countries can negotiate trade deals with more than one country at a time. Trade agreements undergo a detailed approval process. Most countries would prefer to get one agreement ratified covering many countries at once. The last benefit applies to emerging markets. Bilateral trade agreements tend to favor the country with the best economy. That puts the weaker nation at a disadvantage. But making emerging markets stronger helps the developed economy over time. As those emerging markets become developed, their middle class population increases. That creates new affluent customers for everyone. There are also some disadvantages. The biggest disadvantages of multilateral trade agreement is that they are complex. That makes them difficult and time-consuming to negotiate. Sometimes the length of negotiation means it won't take place at all. Second, the details of negotiations are particular to trade and business practices. The public often misunderstands them. As a result, they receive lots of press, controversy, and protest. The third disadvantage is common to any trade agreement. Some companies and regions of the country suffer when trade borders disappear. The last disadvantage falls on countries' small businesses. A multilateral agreement gives a competitive advantage to giant multinationals. They are already familiar with operating in a global environment. As a result, the small firms can't compete. They lay off workers to cut costs. Others move their factories to countries with a lower standard of living. If a region depended on that industry, it would experience high unemployment rates. That makes multilateral agreements unpopular. Then I would like to introduce the relationship between the two. First one is the contradiction. The most favored nation principle is an important and basic principle in the multilateral trading system. Regional trade agreements only implement preferences among internal members to create a free trade environment, which will adversely affect the stability and development of global trade. The contradiction between regionalism and multilateralism is also reflected in negotiation resources. Because a country's negotiation resources are limited, the institutional capacity that can be used to solve the problems in multilateral trade negotiations will be transferred to the management of regional trade agreements, which will naturally have a negative impact on multilateral negotiations. Then I would like to introduce the consistency of the two. Actually, they have the same goal. Regional trade agreements are consistent with the core rules of the multilateral agreement. Both multilateral agreements and regional trade agreements pursue to promote global economy and trade liberalization, and then promote global economic development. Next, I would like to introduce the two opposite views. In recent years, there are more and more regional trade agreements in the world, from negotiation to final agreement and implementation. The negotiation resources occupied by regional trade agreements are increasing. So, the resources invested by countries in the multilateral trading systems are decreasing. The next one is regional trade agreements have promoted development of multilateral trading system to some extent. At present, more and more developing countries have signed regional trade agreements with developed countries to solve the time inconsistency in multilateral negotiations. At the same time, developed countries will also increase their investment and technology transfer to developing countries, so as to make domestic industries of developing countries turn to export-oriented and further strengthen the roots of trade liberalization. The deepening of trade liberalization in developing countries is conducive to promoting the multilateral free trade process of WTO. Finally, I would like to give you a conclusion. For developing countries, regional trade agreements doesn't mean that multilateral trade must be abandoned. Regionalism can be compatible with multilateralism, which requires effort in many aspects. The key is how to design international laws to ensure that they do not harm the world economy. This is all for the presentation. Thank you. Bye-bye.